Hello and welcome to What's My Tagline? I'm your host, Carol Flagg. Thanks for tuning in. On this show, we put our microphone in front of a variety of industry experts to understand how marketing, social media, and PR activities influence messaging, branding, and reputation. You can follow the conversation on Twitter at hashtag What's My Tagline and follow me at Carol Flagg. My guest today is Beth Friedman, president and founder of the PR agency 1022. Prior to starting the company in 2005, Beth served as a director of marketing for A4th Health Systems, McKesson, and eWeb Coding. She's a member of HIMSS, AHIMA, HFMA, and the American Marketing Association, and began her career as a clinical coder and supervisor for two large Pittsburgh hospitals. Beth, thank you so much for being my guest today. I've got a little bit of a cold, but I think we're going to power through here. So my first question of all my guests is, if you had to describe yourself as a tagline, what would it be?
You know, we at Agency 1022 have a tagline that says something like healthcare IT, PR, and marketing simplified. And so I guess if I had a tagline, it would be about simplification, about being practical, and about being balanced. I don't think PR has to be complicated or expensive to be effective.
So keeping it simple and making PR, if possible, not in a super expensive process like a lot of companies think it is. So before we sort of get into the heart of our conversation, which is really about how companies can earn media placements, do earned media, I gave a brief glimpse of your background to our audience, but talk a little bit more about how you got into healthcare and specifically how you got into PR.
So it all started back when I was in high school. I had a chemistry teacher who made an assignment. Her assignment was to write a paper about a healthcare profession. Since I'm one of those people that gets queasy at the sight of blood, I knew nursing or being a physician wasn't in my future. So I did decide to write about the career of health information management, and that has been a fantastic springboard for all kinds of opportunities in the healthcare industry. I did work in a hospital for several years, as you mentioned, as a clinical coder, as also in quality assurance, and as a medical records supervisor. So lots of time spent in the hospital. It was an excellent foundation for my second phase of my career, which was in the healthcare IT industry. I segued into working into marketing by working into sales first. I worked for First Data Corporation and then McKesson in sales and account management roles before moving into marketing. And when I met marketing, I met my career. I love the marketing aspect, and I love the public relations especially, because I guess at the heart of it all, I'm a people person. And in public relations, you get to meet with all of our industry's fantastic editors. You get to work with subject matter experts, both in the hospitals and the health systems, as well as physician practices, and at the vendor side too. So I started my firm in the year 2005, and we've been growing and going ever since.
And so you've been in the industry quite a while, and specifically in this health IT industry that we both occupy spaces in. And one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show today was to talk about this issue of building editorial relationships and securing earned media placements. For the benefit of our audience, can you first actually help define what that means, having earned media placements?
Of course. So earned media is different than paid media. Many things that you'll see out in the industry are what we call paid media, where a vendor pays a outlet, whether that's an association's newsletter, whether it's a magazine, whether it's an industry blog. So a vendor may pay that person or that editor or that organization to actually place their content, to place a white paper or a case study or even an article in some cases. The other option to that, and what we prefer to do, is what we call earned media, and that was your question, was what is earned media? Earned media is where a vendor, representative or executive from a vendor, or a provider at a hospital, health system, or physician practice is either interviewed by an editor like yourself, or that person submits a guest article, column, or blog. So earned media is not something that the vendor is paying a fee to put onto that outlet's website or on the pages of a print magazine. The vendors actually made the connection between the editor and the subject matter expert to have that expert recognized as someone the editor wants to interview, wants to receive content from. And there's no fee to have that information or that article or that interview placed. It is earned through that relationship with that editor.
So when you talk about that and define what that means, obviously the first part of that speaks to the first part of the question, which is how to build and maintain editorial relationships to secure those placements. So it sounds like this is something that your agency obviously spends a great deal of time doing. You actually go out and you begin developing these relationships with editorial people across the health IT spectrum. Is that correct?
Absolutely. That's where it all begins. The editors aren't going to know about you if they don't know you. And quite frankly, in meeting with editors, which we do all the time, we hear time and time again, they literally get hundreds of emails a day. So unless you have a relationship with them and they know you, you aren't going to get into their inbox. And it takes time to build them. It's not something that happens overnight, and it's not typically something that's done over email or the phone either. We've learned over time that the best way to build a relationship is in person. Editors in our industry, whether it's with HFMA or HIMSS or healthcare informatics or any of the industry publications, they are people. We all are. And we love to talk about stories, and we talk about the industry and talk about topics and trends. And those are best done over lunch or over coffee or over dinner. So we have found at Agency 1022 that the best media relationships are built in person.
Well, we can certainly attest from our side, being a media company, that we do get an awful lot of email from the various PR companies out there, just, in essence, cold emails because we're on media lists, right? And trying to pitch us stories.
Yeah, we hear that like from yourselves and from dozens of others. And the biggest complaint we hear from the editors, and this is just an important point for vendors to remember, is that oftentimes the editors will get story pitches that aren't very good fit with their audience. And
Right.
that is really sort of a pet peeve. So I think it's really important not only to know the editor personally, so you get in their inbox, that's sort of the first task, but the second task is to make sure that the story or the expert or the idea that you're sending to them is relevant for their readers. And sometimes there's some real fine nuances between publications.
And so your job obviously is to understand those nuances because, certainly from a media standpoint, we can tell when somebody who works at a PR agency basically is sending out, in essence, an email to their full media list, right? It's not necessarily personal to either our Healthcare Now radio or to any of our network sites. It's just obviously it's a pitch that's probably gone out to a couple hundred people.
Right, exactly. And that is absolutely not the way to do it.
So when we talk about earned media placements, obviously that's different than a vendor paying for, like you said, a white paper or a case study, or in some cases publications where you actually pay to play for, in essence, editorial content. Talk a little bit about earned media placement. What is it specifically about, if you can get earned media placement, what that can do for a company's image and their brand and their messaging?
Sure. And this is important to think about if you're a vendor and if you're trying to get some media coverage. In healthcare, the healthcare buyer is typically very pragmatic. They are typically, they can read between the lines. They can very quickly and easily ascertain whether something they see in healthcare informatics or something they see in HFMA or HIMSS is a paid supplement or something that vendor paid for, or if it's actually something the editor wrote and your company or your product is quoted and touted in that piece. The credibility that I think earned media receives from the healthcare buyer is at a much higher level than something that will ever be obtained through a paid placement. So we are really strong proponents of the earned side. I think that coupled with that, the other really powerful way to get your company's name and your success story out there is through speaking sessions. So that's another area where the healthcare buyer knows that for most conferences, the speakers are vetted, they're peer-reviewed, So I think, in addition to sort of the earned media we've been talking about, where the editor is doing that peer review or the editor is doing that vetting, the speaking sessions at industry conferences are also another good way to earn media, if you will.
And so as these vendors are out there looking and there's a lot of obviously vendors in the health IT space. Many of them are very large and many of them are very small. And there might be some small to mid-sized companies out there that have thought leaders and subject matter experts and products and services that need some attention from the media. And where would the ad company start? I mean, obviously, hiring an agency would make sense, but just from the ground level up, does it start with them doing a well thought out blog? Is that the first place they would start in your recommendation?
That's a good way. That's a good way to start. My recommendation would be, is always with our clients and with anybody else's target. So, and I don't mean the Target department store.
Yeah, right.
I actually mean to target your audience. So one of the best things to do if you're doing it yourself, which a lot of people are very successful at this, is if you can target where your buyers are, what publications are they reading, what associations do they go to, what e-newsletters do they let into their inbox. So if you can do a little quick customer survey or audience survey to find out where are your buyers, what are they looking at, what are some of their top outlets, if you will. Narrow it down to 2 or 3, and then I would suggest going to that editor's city, reaching out to them, taking them out to lunch or coffee, and build that relationship. Find out what the editor's needs are, find out what kind of things they're looking for, and then make sure that your content is a really good fit. So that's really, I would say, if you're going to do it yourself, that is money very well spent.
Right. And so something that strikes me as really obvious, because I've actually been in the publishing business for over 20 years now, and obviously everybody has, the sea changes with the digital age. I picture earned media placements, and I know earned media placements, quote, back in the day, which really wasn't that long ago. I was still an adult back in the day, but back in the day, you were dealing primarily with print, magazines, newspapers, trade publications, right? And especially in the healthcare industry, most likely trade publications in the space that we're in. Now we're in this digital age, and so talk a little bit, because you've been in this since 2005. Talk a little bit about how this earned media placement, what the definition of that, how it's evolved in our digital age now, since we're not just talking about print and sort of old-fashioned trade publications.
Wow. I guess in one word, it's exploded. So because the editors like yourself, and you can probably attest to this, the editors in the past had one print issue maybe a month or every other week, or of course in modern healthcare world every week. So they had one print issue to focus on and to build content for. And that was, not easy, of course, but it was very regimented, and it was something you could schedule out and something you could really get your arms around. And I think in the digital world, publications, Health Data Management's an example, they put out 2 e-newsletters a day. So it's gone from like one print issue maybe a month to, several times a day that these publications are having to crank out content. So I actually think if you've got good relationships with editors, and that's, that's step one that we've talked about, earned media, I almost kind of see it easier these days because the content engine is so hungry. Editors just really need to rely more on you as a vendor, on the providers as subject matter experts, to bring them stories, to bring them issues, to bring them solutions, and talk about what's going on in the industry. And what's interesting is the content has gotten smaller but more frequent.
If you're just tuning in, you're listening to What's My Tagline, and my guest today is Beth Friedman, President and Founder of Agency 1022. Beth, that's a great point, because you're right. The these publications, online publications and digital publications, these BMS, we publish 25 articles a week, and that is nothing really compared to, a HIMSS Media or Health Data Management, where there's literally hundreds of pieces of content that flow out of their editorial staff every single week. So it does seem to me, you're right, that obviously there is a lot more opportunity to get earned media placement, assuming that it is a subject matter expert, the relationship is there. And these content pieces that you're talking to, are we just talking about articles, or are there other opportunities for earned media placement?
Yeah, that's another thing that's changed in the digital age. I'm glad you brought that up, Carol. The opportunities have exploded as well. So not only talking about volume, but we're also talking about different types of opportunities. We see more and more being done with like what you're doing today, radio shows, podcasts, those types of interviews. We see a lot more happening with video for sure, with YouTube channels and just different types of video interviews. Google also rewards video quite a bit, so that's another reason to reach out to editors and find out if they're doing videos at a conference, which we typically find they do, and trying to get your subject matter or your client in front of a video camera at a conference with an editor instead of just having a conversation. So that's another new angle that we find very relevant. Certainly blogs, guest columns, social media even is a fantastic piece. Again, LinkedIn has proven to be somewhere where healthcare buyers are often looking on LinkedIn for different subjects and different topics, especially in those LinkedIn groups. So to your point, with the digital age, not only do we have a lot more content needed, a lot more interviews needed, a lot more contributed content needed by these outlets, but we also see many more opportunities for a variety of types of content and types of conversations.
So we're talking about the opportunities, and of course there's two sides to every single coin, and the other side of the earned media coin is there are challenges too, and you talked about one of them being, of course, is that media companies like ourselves and others are sort of inundated every single day with emails from various agencies pitching their clients and their stories. What are some of the other challenges that you see out in the marketplace for securing earned media that these vendors are facing?
Oh, probably one of the biggest ones we see is that some of the publications are going away. We've seen several, especially in the niche areas, we've seen the demise of several where we had really strong editorial relationships, and we know that the particular department in the hospital, a lot of our clients are niche vendors where they're serving just one or two departments in the hospital. So sometimes those publications have their own, those niches have their own publications that are focused on that audience. We've seen some of those go away. So that's one of the concerns I see. The second is just, I don't know, I think, I hate to use the term fake news, but we often see the emergence now of a lot of channels and media outlets that are trying to be everything to everybody. And as we all know in healthcare is unique, and it really is. We're every day we're dealing with life and death situations. If you're at a provider site, if you're at a vendor site, you've got, probably a whole alphabet soup of acronyms that you don't really understand unless you're in the industry. So one of the only other concerns I have is a lot of these sort of more global media companies trying to cover the healthcare sector and not doing it as effectively as media outlets that are really just dedicated to healthcare IT.
Well, that's a really good point, because there is healthcare from obviously a global perspective, and then this the health IT segment that we're talking about.
Correct. So finding certainly finding a solution for discharge planning software is much different than if you're a patient looking to find a nursing home yourself. So yeah, there's the whole different thing about healthcare marketing versus healthcare IT marketing and PR.
So Beth, let's talk about the future, because we all think about these things on a daily basis on where the industry is going. I think about that from my perspective. I know you think about it from your perspective. So kind of put your Harry Potter hat on, or look in your crystal ball, and tell me, earned media, it's not going away. It sounds like there's a lot more opportunity in the digital age than there was in traditional print and and traditional radio and TV. So talk about where you think this may be going as far as either format or frequency or types of earned media. Again, blog articles, that seems to be obviously, a natural outlet for all of this. And we experience that on our side. Podcasting and our live radio, yes, we experience that as well from an earned media and a thought leader standpoint. And you've touched upon some others. But what direction are we going in? Are we moving more into multimedia and less away from traditional online? Are we thinking about earned media placements really from perhaps a smartphone first? Tell me your thoughts on this.
Well, those are really good questions. I think that there's a lot that we will see in the next few years. I always go back to who is your buyer. I think if you're a vendor, you have to go back to that question over and over and over again and really know who that target audience is. For most healthcare software applications, the buyer is sitting at their office at a desk in a hospital or at a cube in a hospital or up on a unit, or if they're a physician, they're sitting in their physician office. Most hospital people, when they go home, they disconnect for the most part. They're not doing hospital work anymore when they're home. So it's a little different than, say, somebody that works at a vendor. So I would say most vendor staff probably are at home in their home office and working, any time of the day or night because they can. Hospital people typically work when they're at the hospital. So you have to think about their mindset a little bit differently. So it always goes back to knowing your buyer. So I think keeping in touch with what they're reading, what they're looking at, how they're digesting information is critically important. We do that as an agency, and I think it's important that every vendor makes sure they take the time to do that, at least on an annual basis. So that's the first part, is just keeping aware and keeping track so that you can keep up with the changes and the trends. The second part, I think, is that we will be having all types of media for years to come. I think you're going to have readers that really are healthcare buyers that want to just research a very specific topic, say antibiotic usage tracking in my hospital, right? So they're going to look for very specific things, and they're going to love those articles and those long-form blogs and things that provide them a lot of how-tos, that provide them a lot of lessons learned. They're going to continue to look for that. So I think that's still going to play a pretty important role. I think the third thing to keep in mind as we look toward the future is this thought about testimonials. So oftentimes we can look at consumer sites and how we shop as consumers on the web.
Sure.
So if you pull that into it a little bit, I often, when I buy something from Amazon, I'll look at the information, I'll look at the specs, and I'll scroll down and look at the reviews, right? Because you want to know what other buyers thought of that product. Historically, we've done these long case studies. We've had these providers for the vendors out speaking and writing, and that's all good. But I think we'll probably get to a point where on a company's website, you might have these very short testimonials about the product or service. And I think that the buyers probably will appreciate that in the years ahead. So I think shorter, more concise, and more specific is definitely the trend. And then, I think the one piece that will never go away, Carol, is the people relationship part. I'll share a story with you. I was at HFMA the National Convention last year, and I ran into a CFO who I had known in my past work at one of the large health systems. And I often ask these questions of people like CFOs, CIOs, folks that I know that work in the provider side. And I said, just give me a quick refresher. How are you finding your vendors and selecting your vendors today versus yesterday? And he kind of chuckled, and he shared with me that in many ways it's the same. He said, Beth, it's a relationship. He said, if a salesperson from a vendor or a marketing person comes to me and introduces themselves, I'm not going to buy anything on the first meeting, not the second meeting. I might not buy anything from that person until the third year. But if that person stays in touch with me, if that person circles back around with me, if that person sends me relevant articles or white papers that his or her company is doing, that bodes very well for that person being part of an evaluation process when the day comes that we need his or her product or service. So, while a lot of the new technology I think will keep pushing us forward, sometimes, again, going back to my tagline, keeping it simple, keeping it practical, and continuing to build those relationships is very important for any sales and marketing professional in our healthcare IT industry.
Yeah, and sometimes that's, it's not all about IMing somebody through Twitter.
Exactly. It's about buying them a cup of coffee or taking them out to lunch.
Right. Making it a little bit more personal. And I think, and I think some of that's been lost. That simple and practical, and sometimes the basics really do work. And I think vendors, not just vendors, media companies, PR companies, agents, we all kind of get caught up in the expediency side of this. It's just easy. It's just quicker to shoot an email. It's quicker to IM somebody. It's quicker to connect on LinkedIn, and hopefully they connect back and make that relationship. But not always.
Yes, it might be quicker, but may not be as effective.
Right. Well, Beth, believe it or not, we are just about out of time. I want to thank you. You are my earned media placement guru.
Well, thank you. I'll take that title.
Yeah, that could be your next tagline.
Make sure you put healthcare IT in front of it, though.
Okay, yeah, healthcare IT earned media placement guru. Okay, I've just given you another tagline. You can learn more about Beth and the work her company is doing at ten22pr.com. And be sure to follow her on Twitter at HealthITPR and her company at Agency Ten22. You can share your thoughts or comments on Twitter at #What'sMyTagline or visit the program page on healthcarenowradio.com. Have a topic related to our show you want to hear about? Or are you an expert who'd like to be on the show? Reach out to me on Twitter at Carol Flagg or email me at carol@healthcarenowradio.com. Until next time, I'm Carol Flagg, and I want to know, what's your tagline?